Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Widening Circles special guest series. For those of you who are not familiar with our work, Widening Circles is a peer community of space holders who are looking to build mycelium, build connections from different contexts, from different parts of the world, from different kinds of work that we're doing as coaches, therapists, healers, facilitators, and explore the question of how we might create an environment that is supportive of our growth as humans and professionals, both for ourselves and for others. And today we have as our special guest, Pai Villaraza, a very, very inspiring and curious human being that I've had the honor of being a student and a participant or a member of his community of inner dance that you're going to find out more about in this video. And I'm going to invite you to listen to our conversation in this spirit of non-linearity, in this spirit of allowing for more of this earth consciousness, this consciousness that is rhythmic and cyclical and is moving between dimensions and between spaces from which we might ask questions and get them answered through what is happening, where you really trust your consciousness to move in and out of what is being spoken, and trust that where your attention is being drawn to is exactly what you need to be hearing. Because Pai is speaking from a very, very interesting space that allows for this convergence of East and West. And it might be difficult sometimes for our Western minds to follow that way of being and that way of presence. And I just really want to presence this before you dive in, that there is something very magical that happens if you allow yourself to surrender and to trust, to hear exactly what you need to hear in this conversation that explores so much around the way that our contexts are speaking through ourselves and to one another, and around emergence and basic questions of existence and variety, as well as we bring these different states of consciousness that we come from into a shared space, and going back to a place of what Pai referred to as weirdness before it was so professionalized and the body-mind solution rather than problem. So I'm really, really excited and honored to have this incredibly special human as our guest today. And I invite you into listening to this conversation. And if you're interested in following up on our work, as we invite more such beautiful people to be with us, you can click the subscribe button so you will know next time, in a month's time, when we invite someone else that you might be interested in connecting to. And in the meantime, enjoy this conversation and let us know what landed for you and how it landed for you in comments below. So hello and welcome everyone to the third episode in our Widening Circles special guest series. It is a space in which we invite special humans from different parts of the world that inspire us in our space holding, in our humanness, and in our capacity to hold space for other humans. And today our special guest is Pai Villaraza. Pai is the founder of MAIA Earth Village in the Philippines. And it is a space that has this intention to look at Earth as a studio, Earth as a teacher, and look for ways to bring spiritual and scientific insight into how we might go about creating a more happy and ecological living on our planet. Pai is also the creator of a container called Inner Dance that has initiated a global movement of emergent spiritual awakening. Emergent as in different from the kinds of spiritual growth and awakening that take place when there is a lineage, when there's a tradition happening. So the process that, or the state of consciousness that Inner Dance represents is very much an invitation to return back to source, to the source of wisdom, to the source of spirituality and insight that is within each and every one of us, and a permission to do so in a way that Pai's work points to the fact that this is something that is already taking place. This is something that already is here. And perhaps there's just this way that having a shared container in a space, in an intention to go about it, to go into it, can support us in that. And I will let him speak more about that later, but I just want to recount my own experience with Inner Dance and with Pai before we begin, and the reason why I'm inviting him here. I first encountered Inner Dance about 5 years ago when I was in Bali, and I still remember that experience as one of the deepest reconnections with home, with present moment and body and depths of my being. One of those really magical experiences that I always return to whenever I had the chance to do that. And just about half a year ago, or a little bit more, I returned to Inner Dance in a retreat space, in a training that was held by one of the community members of Inner Dance, and my teacher, whose name is Peter Vricha, and who you met. And he was integrating Inner Dance in his program of training for deep transformational coaching. And it was once again an incredible space to go through a very deep process of grief that I was in, as I had just lost my father, went through a breakup. It was a very difficult moment for me, and I was able to really process and go through so much of it thanks to this space. And because of that, I decided to sign up for Inner Intensive, which is an online program to support people who wish to learn how to hold space for Inner Dance. And I've been part of that for the last almost 6 months now. And it's been one of the most beautiful and intense journeys of returning home, of cultivating trust and surrender, not just in that space, but in all areas of my life, in all kinds of space holding that I'm engaged in. And the way that Pai has supported us has been so inspiring for me. And at the same time, he's one of the most humble people I've ever met. So you're going to have a chance to experience his presence now. And I just want to say one last thing before I give him the word, which is that I consistently have these experiences as I speak with him, as I engage in these spaces of almost being like the earth, feeling like I'm the earth that is held by the cosmos, is how I feel in his presence. So I just really want to thank Pai from the bottom of my heart for being here. Thank all of you for being here to engage in this conversation. And I'm going to begin with a question to Pai to perhaps tell us a bit more about himself and about Inner Dance and his work, anything that wants to be known that maybe I didn't get to point to as I was introducing. So, Pai, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor. I'm having these bronchital issues, which I feel might be long COVID. So forgive me if I wheeze and cough. I'm gonna press the mute button when that could happen, and I don't like doing that in people's ears. Um, so yeah, just wanted to mention that. Thank you for hosting, and I haven't really accepted that many invitations to do interviews and spontaneous group meetings, and I think this is the first one I'm doing in a while. So something is shifting in my space where I'm coming out of my cocoon and my little hermitage in the island of Palawan in the Philippines. Yeah, so it's hard to put into words what happens outside of words. It's exactly the ability to explain the inexplicable that comprises emergence, not just from my work. I feel that when I speak from my context. And it was Dr. Peter Rickshaw himself who pointed out in his home in Bali and throughout his work with many Westerners how rare it actually is for a man of color, you know, like a brown man, to be holding space, especially for Westerners. And he wasn't just looking at this novelty, he is pointing out the fact that there's something interesting with the paradox of it all. That there's something about the historicity of our context, which has taken a long time to find its own voice, has taken a long time, not just to speak up, but to actually come from a meeting point where the mode of intelligence are able to share terms of references and just sharing history. I feel that the West is visiting its Eastern aspect through experience, through the shamanisms, through the meditations, through energy process, through the heart. And there's something very interesting about the new yoga or the new shamanism that seems to tap into like another branching out of or into science. There's something about the way we're accessing Western languages and that's coming out of the trance almost. I live in Asia where there are a lot of islands where there are these people who are seeking ways to surrender, to tap into the collective space. And this is something not easily understood, but this is actually something my people or the people who come from my context take for granted, where we are actually interested in what might happen on the other side, where identity, individualism, containment, boundaries are what is taken for granted. So that when I speak and when my context speaks, it doesn't come from a self as much as it begins to come from a memory of, a memory that might be what is held in oral tradition and what might even be before that, what might be archaic memory. For a long time, this hasn't been easy to actually speak from such a nonlinear space, a space of chaos, a space of Shakti, a space of Kuan Yin, a space of MAIA, the space of the Divine Mother. And it would be interesting to speak about culture in this way, I'm not sure how well versed you are with the Philippines or the Filipino or the Filipina. We are at the very far end of the east. We're at the far east, meaning if you just kept going east and east and east, we're the last stop. So there's something about our place in the middle of the equator that speaks from a culture of flow, where you can't exactly put your fingers on what a Philippine culturality might mean. So I am not shy to speak about the inner dance actually as an emergent, yet very, very old form of thinking and processing information and communicating that doesn't really have to speak so much just through words and through sign systems. There's something we know about the new ways of understanding the body, like we're returning to the body, yet the body isn't just my body anymore. We're returning to the emotions, we're returning to the earth. In inner dance, a lot of this comes in the form of the trance. This was maybe the simplest way of speaking it. So I was born in Manila, which is roughly a city of about, depending on how you measure it, from Manila City to the greater Metro Manila area, it's about 22 million people on a scaling, which is roughly, like my partner is from Finland, and that's about 6 million people. So you can imagine my place of emergence. So this was my initial container, and this is what I walked away from after going into a very Eastern, Western, modern, postmodern, post-colonial existence. I decided to walk away from it all in an intense vision quest. At the age of about 23 or 24, I stepped away because of a depression, because I was hearing voices, actually. The most intense voice was, in fact, an embodied voice. I was in California, and I heard guidance that there was someone outside and he was looking for me. I actually met a stranger who took me to the San Gabriel Mountains. And to define trance, it's like time and space do not act in the same way. Like now is a whole network of yesterdays and tomorrows all happening in an all at once, not in a sequence, not in a linearity, where he would look at me as if he saw me not as a person, but more as an energy map. That probably was the catalyst. This definition of healing, to be seen as who we really are. I come with a lot of smallness. Zori calls it humility. I always just felt like I was the smallest organism in the room. And there was something about being seen from that smallness in a space of largeness, where this strange man was speaking about this energy is happening. It's coming about. It's already happened. It's always been there. This is difficult for me to talk about how he actually seemed to rewire my entire history just in a few hours of seeing all of it and being able to speak in a way that held the layers together, so I couldn't avoid exactly what I was most afraid about, which was to listen to the voice, to become what was becoming. So the inner dance came afterwards. I became a sannyasi and I walked away from society without money. I walked for a year. I didn't tell anyone. I became the poorest being. I didn't have food. I barely had clothes. When I walked away, I had a pair of slippers. I had on a sarong and a pair of shorts, and that was it. I thought I was going to walk away for hours, and then hours became days. Days became a long time. Um, the gist of my inner dance experience happened when I lived on a deserted beach on an island in the Philippines called Kalibay. And there, after having been exposed not just to literature that was speaking about the breatharianism, the raw food, plant-based nutrition, it was because I was living actually with indigenous people whom I would visit in the mountaintops of Mindanao, who actually foretold of this time of awakening after the turning of the millennium, where we would go back to the roots, we would go back to simplicity. And they weren't just wording this out, they in fact were practicing this up until 50 years ago, where they literally would not eat anything cooked or processed. And for that reason, not only would they not have cases of disease and depressions, they seem to know certain things that go beyond what the history books would state. And a lot of these communities have disappeared. But it seemed to awaken something inside me. So the Philippines is the second largest producer of coconuts on the planet, and I decided to give it a try. What would it be like to live that Tom Hanks castaway moment, not in a perspective of scarcity, but with this in mind, this ascension process. New Age communities were largely talking about this idea of what would it mean to just give it all, either away, give it all that it takes, to give not just 2% or 10%, what would be 100 to 1,000%. I went to some of the most expensive schools in the Philippines, and I started some companies, and I was trying to make it in economics. I worked in the U.S. The gist of what I have to share is this: less is more. I was sickly, I was depressed, I was disconnected in that space of trying, struggling, running the hamster wheel. In that moment of letting go, you can imagine, just try to imagine what it would be like if you lived alone. No one would be looking at you. You didn't have to sell anything. You don't have to buy anything. Everything is given. You just need to train yourself to climb those super freaky, horrifying tall coconut trees, which are swaying in the wind, and you don't know what animals you might find up there, whether it be snakes, ants, bees, geckos, monitor lizards, bats. For me, that was my yoga. Undergoing the confrontation of the fear of death, the fear of falling down, the fear of going hungry. The first part of this was quite difficult. And this might be relevant to bring up now in terms of what's happening in the world, where climate change, peak everything, peak oil, peak water, peak clean air, peak fertilizer, peak fossil fuels. What is an internal source of energy? And what does it mean to let go and undergo more of a detoxification of everything, of everything, like cell phone signals, indebtedness, obligations, emotional entanglements, like all at the same time. For anyone who's ever quit something like smoking or drug use pattern, or going on a diet, you know what happens. There's like a physical like release, and then what is harder, what is much harder, is the emotional restructuring. It's this learning to fill the gaps with something else that is not something you might be familiar with. So I guess I just got stuck in that situation where I couldn't leave that process. It was ridiculous. But every day, as I got weaker and weaker, and as I felt like I was dying and dying and dying, a pinprick of hope and light would keep me at least on point. That at the same time, though, nothing is the same. This trance state, the state of feeling like you're not you, you're context, you are codes, you are past and future lives all rolled into and all at once. Something takes over. Something takes over. But put all those conditions together: being in nature, eating maybe the highest vibration food in the world is coconuts. It registers the highest in terms of electricity based on its electrolyte levels. For me, the biggest condition that brought my healing about was solitude. It had to do with not having to be boxed in by anything. And when you don't have to be anything, this is the moment where you can be anything. So I noticed several things. Number one, importantly, I noticed that there was a superhuman potential laying within us, on a cellular to an organic, holistic, particulate. There's something inside of us that we don't really know. And as this is brought to question, not just the you, it's humanity. Humanity doesn't seem to know what it is. Then certain basic questions that are not askable because they're so basic, they're so held by our biases that we don't ask, what actually is food? What is authentic nutrition? In opposition to that, what is true hunger? So what does it mean when you eat only when you're truly hungry and you're not bound by the thing in your wrist or the thing in the wall? It's not by schedule. The other major thing that was brought to my inquiry, my attention, is sleep. What is sleep? What really is sleep? It seems like we're eating so much because we're processing so much, and the food is just matching the vibration of what we are in absorption of externally that we're storing from an internal space. And when you're not around people so much, that hunger, which is caused by this acidity, which is caused by stress, it's almost like breaking this hamster wheel motion, running around, not really going anywhere, just really maintaining your running. It's like you're juggling all these elements, and you can't really let go because the stuff would fall and you're not okay with them falling down, and which is occupying all your psychic energy and your biological life force. So I can't. I would say my life is a question and an answer as to what would it mean to actually let it all just fall, if you were willing to experiment with that. Freedom, I think, is maybe the key word. If you were free, if you could be freed up from all these, like from food, for example, how much energy do we spend on thinking about food, driving to somewhere where there's food, or preparing the food, cleaning up after the food eating activity, what then would it mean to not actually have to do that, or anything else that might be consumptive, like we eat stuff on social media or on Netflix, or just as much, which we're processing all the time. If we didn't need to digest a lot of those, what I realized is we don't actually need to sleep so much. And so sleep for me is in fact like an extension of the digestion process. And this is affirmed by a lot of people who either go into raw food or live plant-based nutrition, or people who go near into a breatharianism. So the less I was processing, the less I held inside me. I wasn't eating as much anymore. I would get by on a coconut a day, and then it would go into a coconut every 3 days, because I just was not hungry. It felt like the nutrition was coming from inside, and I got strong, like a sickly, weak, super thin Southeast Asian who was always being bullied in high school, who never, stood up to anyone bigger than me. I actually felt this super strength, and it was huge, and it was strange, because it wasn't, it wasn't coming from food. It wasn't coming from sleep. I wasn't sleeping anymore. I got to a point where I was sleeping at around hours per week. We could talk about this, what circadian rhythms means, and how our seasonal cycles could shift from the sleep stages that we go through that balances out these brainwave activities into what would it mean to enter into REM, to dream state, the REM state while you're awake. The only reason why we sleep is actually to wake something up. And so when you go into the REM state, it's called paradoxical sleep. It seems like there's a way of balancing out a relaxed, depressant neural oscillation. People might measure it as delta or theta frequencies. And when we hold that open, ultra-relaxed state of surrender, something channels through, something courses through. I wouldn't bring up, let's say, spiritual examples to exemplify this. I'd think about like super athletes, like the Williams tennis sisters, and Agassi and Michael Jordan. They like, we have a way of not thinking, yet holding a body-based cognition that is hyper aware. It's holding this hyper oscillating frequencies that I feel is what the divine feminine actually represents, if you were to look at the autonomic nervous system and the circadian rhythms. And I just feel that human society has been repressing, has been controlling, especially the Western rational society that comes after the age of enlightenment and the industrial age. A lot of our medicines, a lot of our education systems, so much of our systems are actually afraid of this trance state that is more and more now becoming prevalent and interesting. But that in the past there might have been societies that would have considered what doctors might misdiagnose as, depression, epilepsy, aphasia, autism, that maybe this is in fact like a wakeful REM state where we are not living in a three-dimensional space-time continuity. So my story begins with this, where I myself had to experience this myself in order to share it with others. I was minding my own business after having lived in the island for more than a year. I was barely eating anything anymore at that time. The energy took over me. I was in a hammock ultra relaxed, and I heard the voice, the mother and I are now one. And my body just started to move on its own, like it was a different thingness, a different entity. So I trusted it because I knew it wasn't coming from anywhere other than like my essence. The other voice that came, which is just as relevant, maybe even more so, was it began in Africa. And then I exploded in this wall of sound and vibration, like I was speaking codes that were percussive, rhythmic, harmonic, and the rest is history. I literally broke out of my body and I exploded into a Doctor Strange, Inception, interstellar moment where I just lost myself. Like it's almost like when you have that much energy running through you, ego cannot exist. And ego is remembrance. Sometimes we have to forget in order to remember, and I guess sometimes we can remember as we forget. So it literally took me a while. It could have been forever, it could have been minutes, it could have been hours to try to remember my father and my mother's name, and to try to remember what a human being was, coming from this space that was above my body where I was looking at this thing. The only thing I knew that was that it, not a he, not a she, the it was dancing. and I was like this cosmic baby that had to be born into this container, this physicality, into matter. And it had something to do with memory. I had to reconfigure myself back into a memory field. There were other events that happened, like on the island and after this, but basically, to make a really, really long story short, I uncovered this inside myself, and without intention, really, I just started bodies and experienced the same thing. So this thing, which at that time didn't have a name, just started to spread like a virus across different parts of the world. This is about 15 years ago, at a time when weirdness hadn't yet been so professionalized. You know, strangeness hadn't been given that much permission, where this is okay. So I had to take a lot of brunts because I had to speak this. Like I literally had to make my way back into the world. I felt like a monkey that had to be thrown back into the city, holding all of these librarifications. I felt like I was this supercomputer. I understood it through experience, and I had to go through the last decade to map out what a new scientific understanding emerges from this strange spiritual experience that's coming from a quantum space, you know, not a Newtonian three-dimensional time continuum, you know, it's not a Euclidean geometrical space. It's this other space, this fourth and fifth dimensional space that I feel is where we are going, and what we're assisting in you know, which is why we're being given tools to make it a little bit more gentle to get there. I don't think everyone is meant to live in an island eating just oranges or apples or dates or coconuts. I feel that maybe something can be catalyzed, and it's more vibratory, what we are already co-creating in a sense, you know, like one story is one story, and there might be some resonance or familiarity with what I'm speaking about. But I feel what makes this worth talking about is the spreadability of it. Throughout the years, my email boxes, inboxes would just be a conversation on the intense transformations that would be happening in Africa and Lithuania and in Egypt and Australia, where something that didn't need an instruction manual, something that didn't need a praxis, an ABC 1, 2, 3, J, 7, B. It like what was that? Like what was that? What is the thing? Is it random? Is it spontaneous? Or is there actually a set of universals? Are there first principles that allows that to seem to be the same no matter where you see it in the world? However, it is old or it is new. What many people call the Kundalini rising experience and the psychedelic experience and the life review that happens in near death and the dream state and the the out of body, where we tend to explore and get excited and generalize these things. Would there be a possible structuralism that emanates from a lot of these that comprise, for me, what emergent means is what is appropriate now, not something that happened or was formulated thousands of years ago or 100 years ago in India or somewhere. What is situated cognition or embodied cognition? What is the global brain in this 2022 that becomes another number as it goes? We know power and insight usually is held when it is in a place of birthing, when it gets institutionalized, when it becomes a dogma, when it becomes habitus. Something is lost. And intuitively we know that true power, true insight, true truth rests in what we call the now, which isn't the vulgar now. It's not the simple now. It's the now that is the cyclical now. It's the Ouroboros now. It's the you know what I'm saying. It doesn't it doesn't require words. So I don't think I need to speak so much beyond what I've already spoken. I respect probably your potency and what you've experienced. My sharing holds two. There's a two-ness there. There's something about the physicality, the body. There's a commitment required that we don't just think this. We don't just speak about it. We don't just make announcements. It needs somehow to be embodied. And I feel that the very roots of Western rational thought is the mind-body problem. It's Descartes, it's Cartesianism, it's mind-body dualism. There's something starting to unify that it's not a mind-body problem, it's a mind-body solution that needs to define what embodiment actually means. And that, I think it's easy to formulate. It starts with trust. I think this is what I held on for so long that allowed me to stay in this strange work, this impossible work of having to be the humble person who was regarded as this healer, teacher, master, who actually was at the same time still the same consciousness, the same little boy who's the same, I've gone through all these weird cosmicalities, but you don't actually change. You're just watching it all, somehow with a contract signed that you cannot just unsign. And that's what the body somehow means. So in that space, having have had to witness, tens of thousands of bodies around the world come into a universal narrative Like in what seems spontaneous or random, um, there's there's something there that needs to be lived and not spoken only and not thought about, that requires the commitment. You know, it's not devotion in that spiritual or religious sense. It's life. It's the being stage. And then, so what that holds in my experience is we've inverted the point. We've inverted the story. We live in a world that says more is more, that we need to accumulate more, we need to have more, we need to have more friends, more resources. When I speak about the body, I'm not just talking about this, I'm talking about, I'm not going to separate it. The climate change that we're experiencing out there is being experienced from within. And when you go through a healing process, your body gets warm and then gets cold. There are seasonalities that are shifting into each other in what is called the sympathetic fight or flight and the rest and digest parasympathetic nervous systems that are learning to hold the helix in some sort of unitive structure been held far apart. I, 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 I held a lot of hope for this long period of time that all of our problems actually have the same one solution, and that is simplicity. We think we need so much in order to survive and thrive. What would it mean that we need? That was the simple. And yet, from that, from my Asiatic body, from my post-colonial body shifting into the post-colonial earth body, the post-colonial is held with a lot of anger and resentment and restriction. And when that emerges into another layer of intelligence, from that trance state, from that spiritual experience, from that cosmic journey, I think that we're being given an intelligence. I think this is important to understand that the more you let go of the mind, there is another level of mindfulness that comes with that mindlessness. That's a non-linear chaos space that actually holds a lot of order and a lot of organization. So there needs to be the widening of circles that hold not just circles of people, it's circles of thought, it's circles of concepts. What might be the domain of, let's say, the anthropologists and the psychologists, the neurologists, the linguistics, the linguists, the philosophers, they're now coming together. Like, we validate all of it. Like, there's a true truth where everything seems to come together like puzzle pieces, and one needs to really take many steps back in order to see the meta systemic mapping of these many systems. And because we haven't really been given the chance to access as much information as we have been given in the last decade, what YouTube, Wikipedia, and Google give us needs to be integrated, not just in the internet, but also in this inner network of, you know, like it's DNA, it's quanta, it's universes of metaphors, and I don't want to go into that because we would just keep going. But like what I'm saying is if I started my sharing from my introduction as a person who belongs to oral, traditional, non-speaking, non-verbal, non-confrontational, non-logical, irrational space. And I don't know how much you've traveled. If you traveled to parts of Asia and you've gone to Thailand and to the Philippines, and you've spoken to people who have yet to come into the northeast, west, southern collusions or collision points that maybe maybe this is coming from that, like the patience that it took to get to this point where we can actually speak together, using mediums and using dimensionalities. Like when you watch the news, it seems like there's this urgency where we need to hurry, but based on what I've been through, this is in fact the point in which we need to slow down. So I feel the deep healing that is being prayed for is time and space. Like people need more time. And I feel the fear of death is based on there's not enough time. And there's always that competition, the Darwinism against time, you know? Like, and then people need space. I don't think we're meant to give people actual time, you know, like a vacation. You know, go get on a plane and go to an island or the desert somewhere. I think that is meant to be accessed where you are at. It's vibratory, and sometimes you do get to that point. It could be anywhere. It could be in the library. It could be in an ayahuasca journey. It could be in a conversation. It seems to slow something down, whatever it is that's starting to speed up, with that quintessence of what do you actually mean when you say it? What is it when you say you get it? So yeah, like from that widening circle space, I really do feel the verbal and the nonverbal are coming together, so that the people from the nonverbal, and that doesn't have to be cultural, a lot of us are coming from introversion, shyness. When you learn to find your voice, your nonlinear collective consciousness voice that might need to emanate initially from like an energy field experience, which isn't expressive, what would be a transition point? What would be a holding of a space that allows for a universe that had just been birthed to go into the growth stages, the volatile, the vulnerable, the tender growth stages. If you were a universe and you were like a baby, what would it mean to nurture you into being? So I do feel there are tools that we can be receiving and are being given and are giving to each other. If you brought all those together, if you brought all those together, you know, the sound, light, vibration, words, semantics, what would it mean to bring the body into the opening, into trust? You know, how would you position the body? How would you understand brainwave activity? How would you look at proprioception, kinesthesia? How would you set the context where people wouldn't know what might happen, and because they don't know what might happen, because anything can happen, that anything will happen, and that anything is actually like paradise and perfection and everything we've been like holding back for so long. So yeah, it's hard for me to bring myself and my work into like a gist, but I hope that I did okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pai. That was beautiful. So many elements just came into our space through your share, and just really appreciating, yeah, the way that what you speak about also is pointing to one of the key questions that we're holding as a community. You spoke about how there's something about context and the way that context is speaking through us in the beginning. And then towards the end, you spoke about how to nurture this universe or baby into being through this sound and light and colors and words and everything. And so that leads up to this key question that I would like to ask you on behalf of us here, which is about how do we create an environment that can support the nurturance of this universe or baby into being. How do we create an environment that supports human growth and flourishing, which is a question that we as space holders are particularly interested in. So yeah, we are about towards the end of our time, but we would love to hear what you have to say on this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think I discovered the mechanism of trust. It's the moment you lay down and the moment you close your eyes, you're already shifting the focal point to a nonlinear awareness that is not resting in the prefrontal cortex. What we're actually activating is the reptilian brain, the basal ganglia, the emotional brain that is not really a visual experience and it's not a logical experience. It's not filtering things. It could be the scariest thing to ask people to take ultimate responsibility for anything that might happen, that whether it be like aliens come or past lives occur or a childhood experience is meant to be looked at. Whatever intuition calls forth is exactly what is needing to happen. So trust isn't necessarily something that we could just speak. Like what we're learning is that there are certain ways of holding a body that allows it to shift into trust. And that is synesthetic. It means building like a concert or a whole symphony of senses, of sensoriums, you know, like what is it about sight and sound and tactility and the olfactory system and the sense of electricity, magnetism, pain, pleasure, that would like just open yourself in terms of how a body might open. What is the most open body? And then as that body starts to open, what would be a gentle yet sneaky way for something else to come through that is not the latent inhibition, that's the gate mechanism. You know, it's almost like you try to dig a hole underneath the wall that separates the one from the many, or in the inner and the outer. So a mechanism of trust could be experienced, and it could be practiced in a way that could let people know what you are speaking about. Like, words are important, but there are certain people in different parts of the world who need those words to be spoken for anything to just explode. But there are people who don't need that much contextualization, who are already in a mirroring process, and anything that needs to be here is already here. So I think what is lacking is more of like a deep dive into practice, into literally just putting yourself out there. So in my own trainings over the years, I never really taught anyone the first time I experienced the passing on of this energy was when I was still in the beach, and there were two people who ended up there on their own pilgrimage. And I literally would just touch them, and their bodies would start to move, and they would start touching other people, and then other people's bodies would start to move, and all kinds of sicknesses would go away. But later on, I had to hack that system so that it could provide like a consistency. So to be very specific about the space holding, I rely on a specific wave. It's let me bring up my screen share just to go quickly. Oh wait, I need to move. Sorry, need to move this thing. I'm sorry if I might take a little bit of time. Let me see if I can find a picture. Here. Okay, so oh, all right. So this is the wave. It's these are mostly like brain state neural oscillations, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, and stress and like thinking and you know information processing happens here. So in terms of space holding, I speak more from a body-based level where I understand how a wave rises and falls, and depending on how you touch a person's body parts, depending on how you speak words, more the vibration of the words rather than the words themselves, depending on how you ask them to lay down, depending on how you ask them to close their eyes, this rises and falls in a way that this REM space here connotes this thing that happens in the sleep stages where the slowest and the fastest, the feminine and the masculine starts to oscillate with each other. So here's where a little bit of science is actually useful so that I don't go into loops and repetitions of what other people might speak about that are useful in like a generalized form. I follow a specific pattern that I have noticed existing in Chinese, Indian, Nepali, German, Australian bodies that speak about a universality that has been there because we have all been on Earth for as long as we have. It's all embedded in us, and it seems like there's something dormant that awakens when we're asleep, that rarely awakens when we awake. So in holding space, I mentioned this because for me the essence of it is like the whole room becomes one. We can go to McDonald's, we can go to Starbucks, we can go to an airport, and we feel that this is not really feeling like it's one. It feels separate. So what would be a way of holding the conditions where it all could be one? If we knew how to speak that in a vibratory way, then whether we are able to bridge that through verbal contextualization or mental, what happens is more of a vibratory context. It's more like nature itself speaks this. That's not just like human context, you know. So when that becomes one, sometimes there needs to be an intensity that allows that to be freed up, everything that was bottled in. And it would demand someone to really trust in order to be able to hold authentically the what might explode. And you might have to ask yourself, am I ready for that? That if anything happens, am I able to hold a space of perception that sees that everything is happening for a reason, everything is connected, nothing is separate. And because I feel that this is what people are yearning for. Like everything is connected, nothing is separate, everything is happening for a reason. Just you being able to speak that and translate that in like multiple different ways, and then allowing them to experience that, not just like hearing it, listening to it, like conversing with it, like what does it mean to actually experience that. That vibratory context is held with the verbal, mental, communal context. I hope that's an opening. There's so much there scientifically, and I'm not going to go into a lot of those because it takes a lot of space.
Thank you so much, Pai. That's beautiful. Holding the conditions for trust and for an experience where all can be one and where nature itself speaks. And it's beautiful, and I really appreciate you bringing the question of the body itself in that context. So not just looking at humans as, as usual or how to say traditional therapy approaches would be more about conversation and speaking, but really looking from the perspective of the body and what it might experience and how it experiences trust and moves into that. So that's really beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing with us all of this. It's been so beautiful, and I've made so many notes, and yeah, just really appreciate this non-linear consciousness from which you speak, and which you spoke to, how long it took you to to actually allow that to flow through, and it's really inspiring and beautiful to witness. So thank you so much for sharing with us, and with this we're going to close this part of our session for today and move into a little break of 5 minutes. Water in, water out, perhaps digest a little bit of what has taken place in the first hour, and then we come back for a dialogue and see what wants to emerge in that. So thank you very much, and we'll be back here at 17 past the hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.